Thank you all again for being here tonight. It is such a privilege and an honor to be displaying this body of work here in South Jersey, where I am born, raised, and returned. This is a really big moment for me, both spiritually and professionally, and I really appreciate all of you for sharing in this moment with me. We are going to dive in to a bit of a walking artist talk or tour of the spectrum of resilience, where we will kind of understand some of the undercurrents of the work. It's a lot to look at on its surface, and then there are some deeper layers that are often unpacked upon a longer sitting, right, with the work. Um, so the spectrum of resilience is really a culmination of all that our community collectively has been going through across the world. The work really does start very personally and then project out into the rest of the world, the larger diaspora, and the global society. And so we're just going to kind of walk through a little bit to take a look into some of this research and some of these locations that the work touches. Um, Before we start walking, I will say that this work is very rooted in my own ancestry. Many years ago, before I ever started working like this, I was having a bit of an existential crisis as a person kind of navigating so many, disabilities and challenges, navigating a tumultuous upbringing and all of the things. And as many of you might know, I have two young ones and lots of young relatives of my own. And I just remember thinking, if I don't tell the stories, who will? And so that led me into a spiral and a deep dive into my own ancestry, which I was actually able to trace back for 8 generations. So I have census records and documents from relatives from the 1700s. Now, as an African American person, that is pretty unheard of. I find that to be a privilege, and I see the privilege not only in being able to access the resources to do that research, but also the privilege to find all of that knowledge. And so I think what happened most immediately was that I said, I have to share this with the world. Knowing that this is such a challenge, I need to share all of this data, all of this information, all of these stories with the diasporic community, right? And so from there, I also did a deep dive into my own DNA and was able to identify all of the various tribes and nations that my ancestors came from as well before their kind of displacement into the Western world. With that, I began to also go back to travel to some of those places so that I can make those touch points, touch the ground, collect the earth, and all of the things to be able to just guide this kind of spiritual and physical processing even further. In my time at PAFA, I knew that I needed space to take all of that research and to place it somewhere. I started having very vivid dreams in the process of doing all of that research, staying up very late into the night, sometimes into the early morning, just scrolling through birth records, death records, and all of the plantation records and all of the things. And I was seeing imagery and work in my mind while I was sleeping that I wasn't quite making yet. And so I made the decision to, resign from my teaching position at that time, where I was working in Camden for 6 years, teaching high school students, general and AP art. And then I decided that it was time to return to a master's program for my MFA. At that point, I was accepted into Moore, and then I was accepted to PAFA. And I was very humbled to be able to have the space and the time to be able to dive deeper into that research and into that artistic exploration. While there, I began to really go deeper into all of this, and a lot of the imagery that you will see here today, in whole or in part, happened during that time and this span of the last 4 years, and all of my travels to South Carolina and to Georgia and to Florida and to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and to Liberia, West Africa, even up to North Adams, Massachusetts, and Vermont, and all of these places, but then also right back home, right? Where even in New Jersey, especially in South Jersey, we have our own vast history that the transatlantic slave trade has created and brought us and left here in the earth. And so the work is really an exploration of that, an exploration of all of that history. One of my guiding principles is that the land always remembers. So even as the world may try to erase our histories and our cultures and our voices, the land always remembers. And if you just touch it, and if you listen, and if you let it guide you, you will uncover much. And so now we're going to go through and kind of uncover some of this together. So let's start with this one. This is actually a great place to start. This piece here is titled Always Sleep in Pawpaw's Lap. And so this setting actually came to me. All of my photographs, they all start with photographs. They always come to me while I'm living life. I'm just in the world, in community, living life, and then I'll just get this feeling in the middle of a moment, and I just have to capture it. And so that's what happened here as I was at an art exhibition for a friend of mine and saw this gentleman who was sitting there with the boot on his foot and felt no problem with holding his granddaughter on top of that injury. And I just thought to myself, how profound, right, for, him to be kind of in this place of suffering, right, and still find the strength and the patience and the tolerance and the gentleness to support someone else, right? And so that was a moment that I just knew at that time that I had to capture. I'm just like, this is such a beautiful message here. And I mean, this piece, when we talk about the spectrum of resilience, I mean, he was so joyful, and he's in a boot, and he's, his granddaughter gets to rest on top of him, even in spite of. The background here in this piece, and as you guys will start to kind of see in all of the pieces, is actually from a site where these two individuals live. And this location I grew up at. I frequented this place since I was probably about 3 years old. This is the Delaware River, and this is the Burlington City waterfront. In my times going there to get ice cream with my family, they have this placard that talks about this amusement park that used to be on the island that was abandoned. And there's talks of wild dogs existing on the island. Some people have tried to take their boats over to the island and were turned around with stories of ghosts and hauntedness. And then one day, as I was driving my children to school and I was in the drop-off line, and I let them out and I said, I love you, have a good day, as I always do. And I just got what I call a glimmer. And something said to me, you have to research this area right here where I live. And I just immediately followed those impulses. And I did while I was in the drop-off line, probably illegally. And I found that this plot of land with all of this history was one of the first slave plantations in New Jersey. This plot of land dates all the way back to the 1600s. And here I am, 5 minutes away, frequenting it, and always having questions. I was always a very inquisitive person, and I had so many questions for everyone, and they never quite scratched the itch. And so it's moments like that that I find to be deeply meaningful and deeply spiritual, almost at a, generational DNA level, right? Of what are the odds that I grow up 5 minutes away from one of the oldest slave plantations in New Jersey and then grow up to be doing the research that I'm doing today? And so that is what has guided me. Another really great overarching theme as we walk, we can start walking. Another great overarching theme is this idea of the Black diasporic community and all of those struggles and sufferings and all of these oppressions that overwhelm us, and thinking, how can I, as a vessel, use art to heal that community? And so in these stories and in uncovering this history, it's not from a grudged place, but it's from a place of, this is what happened. These are the stories. This is what took place, right? Even to this day, being able to somehow, some way, living 5 minutes away from such great history, right? Even the grounds that we stand on all the time, right? There is memory there, right? And so that is what I am trying to capture in the work, but then pairing them with these contrasting, juxtaposing images of care, nurturing, and it's titled Life Raft. And this was after a very tumultuous experience in my life with my children. So I did experience a bit of a domestic violence relationship that culminated in divorce. I'm an open book, guys. And all of these things happened in the midst of my matriculation through PAFA. And so in that time, I remember, I was on a roll. I was like, pumping out work, and I was like diving into the research, and I was just on a roll. And then as all of that was taking place, my brain was in spirals because I had to make sure that my babies were okay. And I remember going in to my studio, and there were times where I would just sit. I couldn't do anything. I was so stifled. All I could do was think about solutions for my children. I could not, for the life of me, paint anything. And it was getting so close. If you guys, any art majors, it was getting so close to that thesis exhibition. Oh, and I remember one of my professors coming in, and she said to me, if that is what is taking up your brain, then that is what you're meant to paint. And I said, oh my goodness, oh, that sounds like a lot. But it very much became the only thing that I could paint at that time. And that moment was so therapeutic, and the life of me, or the lifespan of me working on this painting was so healing for me and for what I was going through. And so this piece is titled Life Raft. And I mean, it kind of, if you look at it that way, that title just kind of came naturally. And again, this was a very real moment. Any photos with me in them, or a lot of them, can't be as real as the rest. But we were exhausted, we were enduring, we were finding our strength. And, it felt like we were finally able to rest after a long battle. And that's how we landed in the bed upstairs in my bedroom. And at that time, I remember creating a lot of space for that type of moment. And as I was laying there with them and they passed out and went to sleep, I just got that feeling, and I jumped up and I grabbed my tripod and I tried to get right back in the same position. And and I photographed that moment. And so that's how it happens. It's just really an experience of living life and giving into those moments, and finding, again, just the resilience within them. And the background of that one, guys, is a slave plantation in Beaufort County, South Carolina. I shouldn't have moved on away from it. So that slave plantation in Beaufort County, South Carolina, is called the Sheldon Plantation. And at the Sheldon Plantation, a large part of my ancestors were enslaved. And our slave owner of the time was H.L. Pinckney. And if any of you have been to Charleston, South Carolina, then you know that everything there is named after the Pinckney family. And so being, a person who grew up in South Carolina, a large part of every year, that just really spoke to me as the backdrop for this piece. Again, just thinking about all of the battles that were endured on those lands and all of the battles that we're still enduring today. All right. And then this piece is titled Rest is a Side Effect of Love. I'm going to try to not sit with all of the pieces for too long, but I want to talk about this one because this is another New Jersey one. So this piece is Rest is a Side Effect of Love. And this is just, again, another exploration of the existence, right, of the African diasporic people, right? It's a very quiet moment of rest. And when you look at the piece, you think that the piece is about rest itself, right? But as I was thinking of this, and even as I captured this moment, I realized that it was more about what conditions do we need to have as a people, as a society, as a world to be able to access rest, right? How do we create a safe space for each other and in order to invite rest? Okay, and so that is what kind of developed within me as I was, in the process of creating this work. Another really important part of my process is that as I am identifying a sitter, it's really important to me to know them. I'm going to be sitting with you for a really long time, sitting with your spirit, thinking about, your environment, all of the things. And so upon photographing this individual who's in the room, I knew that I needed to know them deeper. And so I picked up the phone and I'm like, hey, we agreed that I'm going to do this painting of you. I need to now interview you for it. And so I did. And so even within that, you can see all of these kind of touch points throughout the piece of the things that even make him as an individual feel safe, or the things that I've identified. And as artists, we edit and we keep and we leave. But in that was this kind of deeper discovery as well, right? And thinking about a lot of the times Black men in society have a really difficult time finding rest, right? There are so many demands to live up to these patriarchal ideas of what a man should be. And, there's so much responsibility there, for all of us, right? But especially. And so in this, it was just such a beautiful moment to see him resting. I mean, resting so hard. In the interview, I decided that it was important to highlight where he was from. And where he is from is a part of North Jersey, Passaic County specifically. And if we don't know, North Jersey also had many, many slave plantations and, a very deep history of slavery as well. I like to refer to New Jersey as the Mississippi of the North. Okay. And so in that research, I discovered that in that area, there's a mall called the American Dream Mall. And that mall was built on top of a slave market up there. And upon further research and sharing this piece with the world in previous iterations, I further discovered that the Meadowlands that lead up to that mall were one of the sites on the Underground Railroad. Did not know that when I chose that background, but that is an even greater component. A really interesting thing is that my artwork is inside of that mall. And I did not know until I did this research that that was the greater history. And so just again, as a very spiritual person, what are the odds, right? So I like to hope that they're very happy that I've discovered this information. It took a little bit of trespassing to be able to take some of these photographs that led to this. Um, but, you know, I think it's just, again, very important to highlight these things because, again, it's the earth right beneath us. And as, you know, texts are being rewritten and history is being, you know, warped sometimes right in front of our eyes, we have these kind of living archives and documents, and we are the keepers of our own culture and of our own histories. And so that is something that just guides me. Many of you might know that I was in the hospital last year for quite a bit. It's really scary in there. I'm like, wait, why do I have to spend the night? I don't like this. I was in there, had a really bad lupus flare. I'm a very big lupus advocate as well. So again, open book. I talk about all of the things because I think it's important. We have to talk about the things so that we can be aware of all of the things, right? The chronic illnesses, the generational traumas, the history. And so that's something that I explore a lot in my research as well, is the relationship between chronic illness, between, environmental justice and all of these different impacts, right, on the African diasporic community, once again. And, it's just something that I'm very open about, but I'm just very interested in. And what I found is that when you experience years and decades and centuries of trauma, it actually lives within your DNA. And so in the fabric of my DNA is the trait that carries lupus, right? And, in my advocacy, I go down to Washington every couple of years and all of the things. I discovered that lupus is a disease that largely impacts African diasporic women across the world, right? Especially the Western world. And then it goes to Native American women, then it goes to Hispanic women, and then at the bottom of that list are white women. And so thinking through that, pairing that with the history, thinking about how very literally down to our DNA, these oppressive forces are a constant and current threat to our survival, right? And so in this piece, what was coming to me is that, in this pose, obviously, like there's so much resilience. I'm like, take this picture of me, But right, that's what I had to do every day in the hospital. I was there for 5 days. Every day I woke up, I put my lipstick on, I did my eyeliner. The nurses would come into my room to hide from their supervisors, And so that was the way that I feel that I survived that's the best I could in that situation. And so I knew while I was there that the time would come where I would find an image that I would need to paint. And so this one is quite literally, a point of resilience and survival. This background is important. So when I was diagnosed with lupus, I was working in Camden, New Jersey as well, at that time at a middle school. But then I, moved on to high school, and that high school was actually set in a hospital, right, where I met one of my best friends. and I took, so this photograph, I actually took at least 7 years ago, at least 7. And Camden, again, if you know the Haddons, very big slave site, very, very deep slave history. I have several artist friends who've done a lot of work displaying all of that. But I think that we can end here and then maybe, thank you.